Ready? All right. Are
Ready,
we ready?
Jeremy?
I think we're ready. Everybody hear us?
Everybody
Everybody
see us?
awake? No, me neither. So what are we talking about today, Dan?
What does it say up there? Deploying and updating Office 365 ProPlus with Click to Run.
Right.
I'm Dan Brown. I'm a senior technical writer in the Office division. I work on a team that's responsible for all the content about helping IT pros deploy Office Client, and that includes Office 365 ProPlus. And over here, I think a lot of you probably know this gentleman from his Garage series, Jeremy Chapman.
Maybe. So I've been doing a show actually all about Click to Run for the last 13, 14 weeks, but my history is I've been in Windows deployment for many, many years. I built the original business desktop deployment, Microsoft deployment tools, along with guys like Michael Niehaus. Came over to the Office team a couple of years ago and kind of reimagined how we package up. I know we overuse the word reimagine a bit here at Microsoft. How we package up Office, because the problem was we had this package that was Windows installer based. If you think about Office 365, you'd have to log in, download about 700 megabytes of Office, which might take a half hour. And then after that, click setup.exe, which might take another 20 minutes. Or if it's post SP2 with another 65 updates, it might take another hour. And then 2 hours later, you're able to use Office. So that wasn't the best experience when you think about a cloud service, right? You think about you want to be up and running very quickly. If users are in the case where they can self-install, they're used to doing things like on their phones, where they're going to an app store maybe, where they're downloading a tiny little package and being up and running in a couple of seconds. We wanted to basically trick physics to say, let's use application virtualization and get Office up and running in the span of seconds or very few minutes, as opposed to making them download the entire payload, then install it. How do we do that?
Well, part of that is what you'll see today with Click to Run, and we'll be talking specifically about using Click to Run with Office 365 ProPlus, which is the Office client software that comes with Office 365. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about it. Has anybody actually got Office 365 ProPlus running on one of their machines right now? See a couple of handfuls.
A couple of
Good.
people. Does anybody have a consumer Office 2013 SKU, like Professional or Home and Student, or things that you've purchased for a home computer? Or Office 365 Home Premium? So all of those are actually using Click to Run. Everything except for volume licensing builds use Click to Run. Even the perpetual retail builds are all using Click to Run.
So we want to just kind of set the bar here and let people know, because we've gotten a lot of questions over the last few months about, well, exactly what is this Office 365 ProPlus? Does it run in the cloud because it's part of this cloud service? Am I getting a full version of Office? Is it running locally? What's the deal? For one, you see the 9 icons for the programs that you get. So you get all those programs as part of Office 365 ProPlus. Yes, it is the full version. So the version of Word works exactly like Word and all the other kind of Office SKUs.
And I get this one a lot, where people are like, no, I've bought the full Office. The full Office, not that Office 365 one, not that web one, but the full Office. This is the full Office. This is actually, we've packaged the same binaries. We've just changed our packaging format a little bit in terms of how we put that together and how we actually deploy it into the system. So we're using a virtual file system in this case, but literally, code-wise, it's the same set of code used to create these packages. If you think about the build labs that we have back in Redmond, we basically determine how do we want to build this together. Which pieces do we want in there? How do we want to activate it? And it's like, do you want the red car or the blue car if you're in a factory building cars? We just determine we're going to package it this way. Click to Run is one package type.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of the people asking, well, is it actually running locally on my machine? Because I disconnect from the internet every so often, and I'm going off to a beach to do work or whatever. Can I still use this? Yep, it's just like all your other versions of Office you're probably used to. It's running locally. It's installed locally. We'll show that today.
Right.
And in fact, with kind of one user license with Office 365 ProPlus, you can actually install it onto up to 5 devices. So if you've got your home machine, laptop you travel with, your desktop machine at home, or at the office, one license, you get all those installs.
And that's pretty exciting stuff, because a lot of people have more than one device. They might even have a few Mac OS X devices We'll support that as well. So we're not doing a click-to-run based install because that platform doesn't support that. But a user can have 5 machines and they can cycle their installs through. So let's say I have 10 machines. Sometimes this is the case, not very often. But I can actually deactivate and reactivate on the fly if I need to. If I'm using more than the 5 installs, I can only have 5 running in an activated state at any given time. But I can basically reassign them. Let's say I lose a machine or sell a machine or do something like that. I can deactivate that install right from the portal, and we'll take a quick look of that because I've got it actually open here. I can deactivate that from the Office 365 portal, add another machine if I want to, and reactivate it right there as the user. And basically, I've got the flexibility to use whatever machine I want, so I can have Office on any device.
And you actually control that as the user.
Yes, you control the activation as a user in terms of what you do. And I get this question a lot, well, what if I provide a machine with corporate activation to a user, and he decides to go in and log in and deactivate it? Well, assuming he wants to use that machine, he's going to have to reactivate it, and we're actually going to pop up a message that says, you've deactivated this machine. Go here, and it's going to take him right to this portal, and he'll reactivate that machine and have to deactivate one of his other machines.
So that's what we're going to be talking about in terms of what we're actually deploying. So let's talk a little bit about what our deployment options are. And in this world, we really have kind of 2 ways that we can deploy. We can deploy directly from Office 365. And that's what Jeremy was just showing when he was showing you the portal, is that's where you would actually go to do a self-service installation of Office.
So let me just show you just really quickly what that looks like. So when I'm in the portal, I basically have, we recommend 32-bit, another question we get a lot. So 32-bit is the recommended bitness of Office because of the add-ins and all the ecosystem out there. There aren't a lot of natively compiled 64-bit add-ins for Office. So we do recommend that still to this day. If you do have some power users in Excel, you can do mixed installations where maybe some people have, or some machines even of an individual have the 64-bit versions installed, and other machines might have 32-bit if you do need more than that 3 or so gigs of addressable RAM for larger Excel spreadsheets and those types of usages, but we do recommend 32-bit. But you just click on Install here if you didn't have Office installed, and that would basically stream it directly from our cloud CDN, our content delivery network.
And we'll actually do a demo in a little bit where we actually do a local install, so you'll actually see how fast the installation is. As Jeremy was saying, if you think of kind of traditional Office installs that could take a while, maybe longer than we have for this session. Thankfully, we have click to run, so we can actually do multiple installs.
And the nice thing is, and people will argue, well, it's not that slow. If I do the base, like RTM build 4420.1017 install right now and don't install any patches, it's 7 minutes on my machine. You're not really taking a half hour. Well, layer on a service pack, layer on the other 67 updates post SP1. It starts to get longer and longer and longer. I've been doing Windows imaging for years where we packed all of the updates into the updates folder, and that will eventually make it a very, very long process to get the bits down. With click to run, everything's cumulative, so the updates are already in the payload. We don't have to worry about those installs getting slower over time. They're always going to be that 2 minutes or so to be able to do first use, 4 minutes or so to fully cache it on the system with a normal network connection from a normal distribution point or enterprise software distribution environment.
Now you're probably thinking, if you are administrators or IT pros, you're like, I don't want to give up that control of those deployments. Maybe your users aren't local admins on their box, so they can't install Office. What is your choice? Well, the other choice, and which is kind of the focus of most of today's talk, is how do we do this from an on-premise location? And how can I use my existing tools? Because probably a lot of you have your favorite deployment tools that you're using now, whether it's some script that you've created or you're using some type of enterprise software distribution product like Configuration Manager. What you'll see today is you can still use most all of those tools with Office 365 ProPlus and Click to Run, even though it is a different kind of setup engine than MSI.
We're still just running a setup.exe at the end of the day. So whether I'm installing the MSI-based package that's got a bootstrapper setup.exe, or if I'm installing click to run, we're just pushing down a setup.exe. What we can do, though, is determine where it's pulling the bits from, how we want to configure that, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Yep, and as long as you can run an elevated command prompt, you can install. Yep. And in either case, whether you're deploying from directly from Office 365, or you're doing from bringing the software down to your local on-premise location, both of those are still using Click to Run. And Click to Run, as Jeremy said, is kind of our new kind of setup engine behind the scene. It's based on the application virtualization technology, so it takes advantage of virtualization. It takes advantage of streaming capabilities, and the streaming capabilities is really what helps that install go much faster, as we'll see. And you're probably thinking like, but I don't have an AppV infrastructure, and I don't have AppV client installed on my machines. You don't need it. We've got kind of an embedded version of the AppV client in there. You don't need any other AppV infrastructure.
But does anybody have AppV in the audience? A few people? If you do have AppV, you'll be really happy to know that I can run one command line, and in 4 minutes or so, I'll sequence Office. It's all stuff that we build in to the Office deployment tool that we'll show in a second. But basically, instead of spending, sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes months creating that perfect AppV package and then not getting completely to parity, because this is based on AppV, you can really quickly create a package. It's basically an output of the click-to-run full, the DAT files that all of that constitutes, and it will spit out a .appv file. It'll do that in about 4 minutes or so using PowerShell and all the different underlying tools to do that.
Yep, and we'll actually be showing a demo of that in a little bit.
Yep.
Now, to get the software, the Office 365 ProPlus software down from our content delivery network, CDN, we use a tool called the Office Deployment Tool. This is something new for Office 2013. It is a free download from the Download Center, and we have a link to it at the end of the deck. Mm-hmm. It comes with a total of 3 files. We've got setup.exe, which is our setup engine. It comes with a sample configuration XML file, which we'll take a look at. And of course, what software wouldn't be complete without an end user licensing agreement file?
Yes.
And it is a command line tool. It's very simple. Take a look at those command line switches in a minute, so don't worry too much if you can't see what they all say. And as I said, it ships with a sample configuration XML file, which has kind of all the instructions of what do you want to download. Do you want to download the 32-bit version, the 64-bit version? What languages do you want to download? What product do you want to download? And we'll take a look at some samples of those. As I said, it's a simple command line tool. So there's kind of 3 parts to it. You specify where you downloaded the setup.exe file. So you might have it up on a network share somewhere, so it's kind of convenient. There is a mode switch, and we'll bring those up in a second. And then you just point to what's the location of your configuration XML file. And by the way, that XML file can be named anything. You can call it install.xml, remove.xml. Here's a sample. We've put our setup.exe up on a server called Server 01 in a share called Office. In this example, we're actually going to use the download mode to download the software, and it's going to follow the instructions that are in that configuration XML that's on that same share. And here are the 3 modes. There's download, and that's how we get the product files and the language files down from the CDN. Once you've done that and you want to actually do an installation or a deployment, you'll use configure mode. Configure mode is also what you would use if, for some reason, you decide you want to remove the application. And an optional choice, and we'll talk more about this later, is the packager mode, which will allow us to build an AppV package very simply and very quickly. Here is a sample XML file, and what we've done here is we've just kind of highlighted some of the key parts of the file. The source path, in this case, let's say we're downloading the software. We're basically saying, hey, download the software into a share called Office on Server 01. I want to get the 32-bit version. I want ProPlus Retail. I want English language. And a little bit later in the talk, we'll talk about the update behavior for Click to Run and some things that you'll need to know about. So that line there where it says updates enabled and what that setting is going to be important, and you're going to want to kind of think about that before you actually do your deployment, because you want to figure out, okay, yes, once I've deployed, I got to think about what I want to do to service that deployment afterwards.
Right, and one thing you can do that's really helpful is you can just run a scheduled task on the server that's downloading. So it basically hits that share once a month or something. Downloads all the languages you need, because you can list out where we saw the languages. Maybe you're running 6 core languages by default. You can list out all those language IDs, and basically those are like your MUI packs, your multilingual user interface packs, that you can have as part of that package. Now, with updates, we're going to talk about how you can control those a bit more later. But you can also list out and enumerate all the different products that you want. So this is also supporting Project, Visio. You can do Link, standalone downloads, all from the content delivery network. After you've done this, it's actually in your infrastructure. So then at that point, you can determine which package in version numbers. If you want to add a version string into that add line, you can determine which version you want to actually deploy. And you can lock it to that version if you want to disable updates or redirect that update call to your own server.
Yeah, hopefully one of the things that you'll see today is that you still have a lot of control over how you're doing your deployment, how you're doing your updates, even in this kind of new click-to-run Office 365 world that we kind of are hopefully living in soon. If you think of kind of the traditional environment that you've been in, you've probably been working with MSI versions of Office. You're probably used to working with the Office customization tool, configuration XML, and everybody's friend group policy to kind of do your deployments and your configuration. Well, kind of in this new world, we still will have group policy. We'll still have a configuration XML file, which we've just seen. But will you be using the Office deployment tool and kind of the speed of click to run to kind of streamline and make those deployments faster?
But one point to make here is that the OCT, or the Office customization tool, had most of its settings were group policy based.
Yep.
They were preferences, right? So we erred on the side of enforcement, and we use group policy to configure those installs either pre or post installation. It's ideal to have the group policy already in place before you deploy if you want to lock some configurations, get rid of maybe some sign-in experiences, whatever. But you've still got 2,100 plus settings that you can set for a click-to-run based install. In fact, we're using the exact same ADMX templates across the 2013 Professional Plus volume license bits, as well as click-to-run.
And Jeremy has memorized all 2,100 group policy settings, so if you talk to him later after the session, he'll be willing to recite them to you in alphabetical order, either reverse.
If you buy me a drink, I will do this, yes.
That helps.
I'll be at the party tonight.
All right, so let's do a demo of Office Deployment Tool. And I have already downloaded it from the internet. And as we mentioned, it comes with a sample configuration file that you can start looking at. The one reason I wanted to bring this up and point this out is we've had some people ask about this or get confused about this. These exclamation points and dashes here, these are commenting out those lines. So before you actually use this file, or you can write your own, you want to take those out. I've seen some people say, well, I downloaded the version that came with the tool, and I tried to do a deployment, and it didn't work. What's going on?
And unless you have a server named server with a share named Office, and that path resolves, you have to have something in that source path that's going to resolve as to where you download to. Now, by default, I can get rid of that entire source path string, and it will just download a folder right next to where that setup.exe is located from the Office deployment tool if I actually stipulate nothing there. And conversely, when I do setup later, if I stipulate nothing in source path, then I can install right from that folder where setup is.
And since, oops, where did my window go there? Where's the internet? What happened?
Since we don't want to show a whole gigabyte download happen, right?
Now I was actually going to,
okay.
Hold on a second. Where did it go here?
There we go.
No, that wasn't. The ODT ran. Hold on a second. Since I work on the content team, I have to do a gratuitous plug for our content, and everything that you need to know about all the different settings in the configuration XML file is in this one article out on TechNet. So You can figure out, okay, how do I use the updates? How do I specify what languages? How do I pick a particular version or particular client edition? So it's all documented here for you.
And again, if you are testing, say, to a specific version, or you have an ISV with an add-in that supports a specific version, you can lock it on that version by stipulating the version number when you do setup, and then you can keep it there as long as you don't publish an update to where the updates engine is looking for updates.
So, presume you didn't want to sit here and wait for about 5 or 6 minutes to watch a gig of files download. So I captured this a little bit earlier. Just used the setup with the download switch. I had a download XML where I told it to download the 32-bit version to place on my network. It's an elevated command prompt. And then what you'll see is it starts showing you what file's been downloaded. You see here a reference to the Office CDN. That's our kind of share up in the sky, and this will go for several minutes. This x-none.dat file is kind of the big file.
That's the main language agnostic main file of the Office image, and everything else, the language-based DAT files, are basically the equivalent of the MUI packs that you would apply to this when you stipulate the language that you want when you run setup to do an install with the configure switch that we'll show in a second.
And so at this point, it just runs, and eventually everything gets downloaded, and I've actually got the files.
The size of that download, we get that fairly often, is around a gigabyte of total payload. That's not how much you'll need to do when you do an install, say, over your network. You would still use around the 700 megabytes that you're used to for a normal Office install, because this is actually what we call in kind of pre-release timeframes a Mondo build that actually the DAT file that we showed a second ago includes Project and Visio within it, as well as the entire set of Office apps. And the cool thing from a single image perspective, and me coming from a Windows imaging background, it is a one single source of truth DAT file that, depending on which bootstrapper I run against it, I can install everything from Home and Student all the way up to Office 365 ProPlus, everything in between, and it's calling that same DAT file the entire time. It's like how we have in Windows, where if we stipulate the index number of an image, Windows Server, for example, I think has 6 or 8 different indexes that we can install with. It's kind of like that here with Office. We've taken that Windows imaging mentality, put that into Office, so we have one single source of all of the Office packages in one file.
So this is the download that I did earlier. You'll see we've just got one folder, a couple files. Here's that x-none.dat file, as Jeremy was saying. That's kind of our language agnostic file. You'll see here we've got, this is essentially our language file here.
And you can look at the sizes. So the DAT, their x-none.dat files are around 800 megs, which again includes all of the Office apps. And the language file was about 200 megs, which is about the average size for any of the language files. So kind of like with Windows imaging and Office deployments, you want to be a bit sparing in terms of which languages you want to support, and say your core image deployments, those types of things. But you can push out, 4 or 5 or 6 languages, depending on how large your organization is, pretty easily, given the current deployment types that you have in place now. It's the same size, roughly, as the MSI and the multiple languages you might use there.
Yep. And I also earlier downloaded a version where I also downloaded the 32-bit and 64-bit versions. You'll see a couple extra files. I also, at the same time, downloaded the Spanish language file. So you'll see it just keeps adding to more files to the share. And so you have, here's one of your Spanish language files. Here's another one of your Spanish language files. And in fact, you can put all of these, if you want to, you can create kind of a single source area where you can start having kind of your repository of your kind of history of all your builds, and you'll see the build numbers are listed here. It keeps track of what's the most recent build. It creates a backup file of previous builds.
These files, v32 and v64.cab that we have here on the screen, they're very important, because if I do not stipulate a build number and I point setup at a folder, it's going to basically interrogate that v32.cab file, and that's generally going to point to the most recent version that you have in that location. We can override that and basically stipulate that build number that we have of those 2 folders that we have above v32.cab to ignore what's in that cab file. From a software update perspective, we're looking at that v32 cab, and we're going to mount that essentially, look at the most recent build that's in that share, and then install that based on the data that we find in v32 cab. All of the other cabinet files that you saw there are kind of backups of other build version numbers. So that gives you the ability to rename, for example, the newer ones or the older ones to the v32.cab if you want to update that later or install later from that source without stipulating the version number, because that's really your key as to what version of Office you're installing.
So you can have that kind of single repository. So once you've got your files downloaded, you probably want to go ahead and do an install. So what I've done is I've set up a client machine. I actually happen to have the files down here locally on the client machine only because I knew, you never want to tempt the demo gods at these things, and so you always have kind of backup plans. So I'm just going to be running this locally, but you'll still see the same kind of speed. And so I have setup /configure is the install, and I've got an install XML that basically just says, go look at this specific location to get the files to install the 32-bit version, and away we go.
And notice his machine is not connected to a network, so you do not need the internet to install or do any of that stuff. We only need it for activation at the very, very end.
Yep, and we're off and running. And let's see here. I just want to point out here, I'm going to pull up Task Manager, because one of the things I want to show you is actually what's kind of running things behind the scenes is this integrated Office, and this will become important because this will turn into a service, and this is what's really kind of going to be used for doing update and checking your activation over time. But it does run as a kind of a local system process on your machine.
It's important from a deployment perspective for tools like Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, who essentially start out the process from the initiator's account, which might be admin, but then go into system account. So if I've, say, got to have be able to reach into my deployment share, I got to have permissions to access that from the system account also, right? So we do some things in MDT. Sometimes we can either copy the files into the local disk or include them in the WIM and set up from there, or make sure that all domain objects, for example, in a deployment, whether they have a user signed into them or not, have the ability to reach that deployment share, so that sometimes people will get a stop at 10%, and it means that basically the initiator process could reach to these source files, but the system process didn't have access to where those builds were located, and that's where it stopped.
By the way, Jeremy, while you were talking, I'm already up and running in Word.
Wow. But of course, I want to
Not that you were talking that long, but
no, I know.
In fact, and you'll notice here, got this little thing. It's still running. It's only 20% installed right now, and I've already opened Word. And if you think this is some type of magic trick, then I somehow have done something special with Word. I can fire up Excel, and as Jeremy mentioned, I'm not connected to the internet right now. So
it's not a magic trick.
And
but Dan, I can one-up you, I think, on this demo.
You think?
I think so. So here's Excel running. I'll try to, at least. All right, so people ask us a lot of times, how does this compare with the MSI, and does it work on Windows 7? Because not everybody in the audience probably has Windows 8 running, right?
Yes, they do, right?
Actually, everybody probably does, because they all bought a Surface.
Yep.
That's true. So we're going to kick off a Office 2010 SP1 MSI install. I've got this in another virtual machine that's hosted that doesn't have internet connectivity, but it's on a network with a bunch of other VMs. And you'll see that even just getting to the Install Now button, it's roughly about the same speed almost as getting Office running with Click to Run, so we're at the Install Now button. Because what I want to do is, kind of in the tradition of our Garage Series stunts and all that stuff, race this against a few other installs of Click to Run, and show you also something that you get with Click to Run, which is side-by-side support and installation next to an older version of Office. We're going to click Install Now, and we're going to race that, because I want to do not just 1 or 2, but 13 installs of Office in the span that it takes me to do 1 install of an MSI. All right, so we're going to go ahead and click on Office 2003, and we're going to open up a file, because not only can I install, while that's there, but I can actually be working. So users are generally in fear of new Office deployments because they may not have been trained for it. They might have a quarter 4, financial data finish out for the year, whatever. The nice thing is they can keep their Outlook open, or they can keep their Word files open, all that stuff, and even continue working while you push down new Office builds to them, so they don't have to stop working, which hopefully should allay some of that fear that users might have for an upgrade. And I'm just going to go ahead and open a couple other things. So I didn't have a pre-existing Office install there, but I've got a couple of files opened. Go back to my tile view. We've got now a couple of installs nearing completion, and just to complete the circle, we'll go ahead and open a file in 2010 as well, and minimize that window.
I'm at 89% right now.
You're at 89%. So the other question we get is, sure, it's a little bit faster to get that first run experience, but is it faster to be fully cached versus fully installed before setup exits in the MSI? And yes, it definitely is. So our MSI is still chugging along. It's at 50% if you believe in progress bars, because it's still going to do the SP1 and 65 update install at the end of that progress bar, which will add another 10 minutes to this install.
Finish before our session finishes?
I think it will, but yeah, in this case, so I've basically got all of the 13 copies of Office installed, up and running, and in that time frame, I've got probably about, even though the progress bar says 50%, I've got about a quarter of one MSI installed there. Let's just make sure all of this works and it wasn't just all complete smoke and mirrors, because it sure wasn't. So my programs, there we go, we got our new folder. Whoops, we're going to launch Word and just show that running, so at 15% now, show that running side by side alongside the old version of Word, which should look fairly antiquated compared to the newer one. Wait for our screen to refresh there. Now all of this stuff, so we've got now Office, the new Office 365 Pro Plus running side by side alongside the old Word 2003. Again, users don't have to stop working. We can run side by side. We've got this safety net in case they're afraid of maybe Excel files that might not work in the newer version of Excel, or add-ins or macros, things like that. We try to make sure that all of those things just work out of the box. But in the cases where they don't, or you want to pilot or transition from a new or an old version of Office to a new one, this will help you speed up deployments. But once you stabilize everything and test everything and make sure you've got anything that does break kind of logged, then you can start removing the older versions of Office, because you still want to end up with one version of Office on a user's computer. It's not a best practice to have two versions of any software. Office is among that portfolio of software where you don't want to have two versions of anything. But as a transition aid, this will help you deploy faster. So let's see our MSI here.
I've got a question.
Yes?
The traditional way and remove the old version and install the new one?
So the question is, can I remove the old one and install the new one? I can do that. I'd have to use a task sequence or something to do a remove and reinstall. That'd be a scripted thing. I could use Microsoft Deployment Toolkit or System Center Config Manager. The app model will do this, for example, uninstall the old one and reinstall the new one. So I need something that will actually run that uninstall command for me before the install command runs on Office 365 Pro Plus in this case. The nice thing is in those cases, and this is what we actually recommend for the MSI as well, as you may know, because we don't want to upgrade. We've actually advised against upgrading, say, 2007 to 2010 in the past. But we do store all those settings. So even if I've got a bunch of add-ins and things, customizations, custom.office UI files, for example, for ribbon customizations there, it will still keep those preserved and actually load all of those ribbon customizations and things into the new Office after it's set up, even if I've uninstalled the old one prior to running the install of the new one. All right, so that was 13 installs, and I've swapped out the desktop backgrounds on all of them to show that they're all running side by side. That's pretty impressive, right? Maybe not. All right. Geez, it's too early, isn't it? All right. I'm going to go back to your demo or back to the PowerPoint?
Actually, back to the slides, I think.
All right.
So trust me, mine's successfully installed. You saw his 13 install, but you can see very quick, up and running in just a few minutes, and actually being able to use the packages. That's part of the streaming and application virtualization kind of engine behind the scenes. So once you've installed, you have to think about, okay, what is going to be my updating experience? And because we're using kind of a new model, a new kind of world with click to run, the update behavior is a little bit different than probably what you're used to. You've got a couple choices in terms of how you update and install. One, automatically behind the scenes, you can pull down the updates from Office 365 service, and that would just happen kind of in the background. You wouldn't even know it was happening. If you want more control as an admin, you can use the Office deployment tool to pull down the latest builds to your environment, do your testing, and then put that kind of newest build out there into your kind of deployment share and have those clients already installed pointing to that location to get updates. And again, that can happen kind of automatically in the background. And your third choice is you can actually rerun the Office deployment tool, kind of rerun the setup to kind of push out a new build. And this is probably the choice that people would be using if they're using something like Configuration Manager.
Or they might manage the location where the updates are looking to, right? So I might have, for example, if I've got a replicated file share somewhere that always resolves for a local version of that wherever they are in the world, I can point to that share. It might be Contoso, / Contoso Office updates or something.
Yep.
And it will look there for updates. That's actually a bit more elegant because in this case, if we're going to push down the entire payload, it would mean I'm pushing down the entire Office payload a gigabyte times my 10,000 machines, which is probably something I don't want to do if I can avoid it.
Yep.
So I'm going to have that update engine ideally look for maybe an HTTP path or a UNC path where I'm publishing those updates to. Ideally, a replicated file share so it's close to where those machines are in terms of performance and bandwidth and everything else.
Yeah. Now, if you've been kind of paying attention to this slide and you're kind of in the update business now, you probably noticed there are some things that aren't mentioned here. There's no mention of Windows Update. There's no mention of Microsoft Update. There's no mention of WSUS, Configuration Manager, in terms of integration with WSUS. So all of those, you can't use kind of those traditional update engines to update the click-to-run environments and the click-to-run installations.
And the reason for that is how we're actually updating click-to-run builds. So basically what happens is we have about 1,900 components that we enumerate as part of the update process. We look at what's there. If there's nothing there, we'll just install all of Office. If there's something already there, then we're just going to look at that and say, okay, you've got 90% of what I want to update you with. I'm only going to apply 10% of the deltas to your install. So I might only need a small portion. If I'm only 1 month out of the most up-to-date build, it might only be in the tens of megabytes, even smaller in some cases than the actual MSP files that we would have on the MSI world. And then once we're up to date, we actually get a new version number. So the way that the updating and the servicing works is completely different than that additive kind of model we have in the MSI world. Because we're doing that delta level comparison from basically a virtual image of Office, the old one, compared to the new virtual image of Office where we have to compare and then just apply the deltas.
Yeah, and in fact, if you are doing kind of the automatic behind the scenes update process, whether you're pulling down from Office 365 or from some type of internal on-premise location, there's a scheduled task that gets set up after you've installed Office that will be doing those automatic checks, and as Jeremy's saying, it does that kind of delta comparison and then just puts down the updated file. And kind of going back to what we were showing you earlier with the configuration XML file, I kind of mentioned there was that kind of updates enabled section where you could kind of specify, well, what is going to be my update behavior? And the important thing is you need to kind of set that when you do your installation because right now there's no like group policy setting that you can use to kind of tweak that kind of post-install. So you want to set that as part of your XML file that you use when you do your installations.
But you can always run another setup XE
Yep.
ODT that has a different update path essentially assigned in your XML later. And then assuming that you're updating to the same build, it's going to look at that and say, I've already got the exact same build. Okay, I'll just change that update path setting, and that's it.
Yeah. And in fact, if you just flip over to my screen, Jeremy, number 2.
Sure.
You might be asking, well, how do I know what updates are in which versions of the click-to-run packages? Out on the support side, they will be listening, here are what's in the release, the May release. It shows all the security updates. And then down here, notice it says, okay, all of these are in this build of the click-to-run build. So if we had 15.0, 4505, 1006, you would know that that contained all these
and this is
updates.
super important because a lot of times people will ask us, what is the gold version number? What's that golden build? What's that thing that is RTM? And that's, by definition, something that we're changing with every successive update.
Yep.
These are cumulative update packages, so you can't say, I'm going to lock and test on this build version. If you're an ISV, it's a bad practice to say, I'm only going to support build 4420.1017, which, as a fun fact, was the actual build number that we did to RTM for the MSI back in October. You have to be able to roll with the new updates and the new versions, because every time I apply an update, the version number, the minor version numbers that you see past the 15.0 are going to change with every successive monthly build.
And I think, isn't it true we're going to be keeping a year's worth of builds up on the CDN?
Yes, and that's another question we get all the time. Well, I'm not able to apply all these updates every single month because I have to do a bunch of testing in order to make sure all my add-ins work, my files work. I want to do at least some testing there, maybe a lot of testing there. Can I pause that update engine or not apply the most recent builds? Yes, indeed you can. Either through disabling updates, like we mentioned earlier, you can do that and pause for up to 1 year, and we have 1 year of supported builds in that window, or I can point it to my update path that I've stipulated during install time, and that's basically going to look there for anything I publish. And if I don't want to publish everything every single month, I might publish every 3 months or every 6 months. It's basically going to look, it's going to mount that v32.cab file that we showed earlier. It's going to say, oh, there's a new build, and after it discovers that, it's going to pull those bits in from a Delta level.
Yeah. So you still have control over kind of when you take your updates. You're just kind of taking them more kind of in bulk. You're taking a build now.
You're taking a build. It's kind of like in Windows, coming back from Windows. It's like taking the SP1 slipstream WIM file. It's got all the updates to date in that, and basically that makes it a lot faster in terms of applying those updates, and as well as the initial installs.
Okay. Let's go back to the deck.
Sure. Activation doesn't need to reactivate every single time, no.
So if I freeze my bits or I take it offline and keep it in my own repository and it's 2 years and then I do the new install, are you going to stop activating that old version?
So the question was, if I freeze my image and I leave that in my build repository and 2 years later I install that, am I going to keep activating that after 2 years? We support a 1-year window, so you're going to want to stay within 1 year. I'm not sure exactly when we stop allowing you to activate a build that's more out of stray than that 12 months. But assuming that you come online, it will actually look for an updated build right after the task sequence or whatever your imaging process ends, and it can find that newer build, assuming you've got one there. So it also makes it easier from an image staleness perspective in terms of being able to apply those updates once that image does come back online, and then activate from there. We do want to only support 1 year of builds. I don't know when we're going to turn off the pipes in terms of activation, but with the, say for the 2010 subscription bits, those we're going to turn the activation off, I think, as of April 2014,
I think
according to that 1 year support policy window that we've got to apply these updates. So if you're a pre-existing Office 365 Wave 14 customer, you've got that 1 year to get to a Wave 15 build, essentially. That 1 year window applies to either circumstance.
And as we were mentioning, just some examples of what you would put for the updates enabled setting in your configuration XML for those kind of 3 different scenarios. If you're doing it automatically from Office 365 or if you want from an on-premise location. Also, as Jeremy mentioned, not only could it be a UNC path, it could be a HTTP location. And then if you want to kind of force the builds through your software distribution mechanism and be running, just rerunning setup, you would just actually say updates enabled equals false.
And if I rerun setup, kind of to the point earlier, I don't nullify the activation. That's still valid. It's basically our secure platform SPP bits that stay there in place, and I'm basically installing a new build on top of the old one, like the update process. In the same way, we're not doing anything to invalidate the activation or anything.
Are the bits on Office 365 generally updated on Patch Tuesday, or is there
So the question is, are the bits generally updated on Patch Tuesday? Yes, they correspond with our normal, our older patching and other cross-product patching processes. Generally, they're updated then. If there's a significant, say, security fix or a bug fix we have to get out outside of band, we will do that as well, sometimes out of band.
So up to this point, we've been kind of talking about, okay, how can you get the bits down to your on-premise environment, kind of showing you the Office deployment tool, showing you how you can do kind of a single install, or in Jeremy's case, it's 13 at the same time. But you're probably thinking at this point, well, I've already got my own kind of system for doing deployments. I've got tools that I've bought, whether Configuration Manager, or I do image builds, or we've got some third-party software, or we've got some clever script we wrote. Can I use that with this new kind of click-to-run world and this Office with the Office deployment tool? So now what we're going to do is kind of talk about how you can combine both the Office deployment tool, on-premise software, and kind of do your deployments kind of at scale and through managed deployments. Now, in most cases, there's kind of several common ways to do deployments. You can put it up on a network share. You might be using group policy computer startup scripts. You might be using various tools like application virtualization. How many people here use Configuration Manager to push out things like Office?
Okay.
Smattering of people. Anybody here using Windows Intune? Hey, one, two, couple, handful.
Okay.
Something near and dear to Jeremy's heart, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit for doing image builds. We can do things like standard images. We can use user-dedicated virtual desktop. All these we can do deployments in those scenarios with Office 365 ProPlus, with Click to Run.
Question I get around imaging a lot, will it survive sysprep? Yes, it does. And if I'm imaging, do I activate the build before I capture the image? No, you don't, because as an admin, it's this 5 activations per user model that we have. So you want to basically install it using Office Deployment Tool in a pre-activated state. Don't run first run. Don't do anything to activate or sign in. That's when you would sysprep and capture the image.
Yep. And the other thing we often get is people like, well, how do we do kind of a silent install? There's a bunch of group policy settings we've got listed in the back of the deck, so download the deck and take a look. We've documented those. There are a couple of cases, if you've been kind of looking at the list trying to see if all your kind of ways of deploying are listed here. There are a couple exceptions. Things like remote desktop services, shared virtual desktops, Windows to Go. That's because of kind of the user versus kind of device model here, because those are all kind of examples of shared instances of using Office. So those aren't kind of supported in the Office 365 ProPlus kind of world.
Right.
Along with, I used to do some work with the military, and they have several networks that have no access to the internet. And because this is a subscription model, we're on a regular basis kind of checking to make sure your subscription is active, and that kind of requires us to kind of go out and kind of phone home to the internet and Office 365. So if you don't have that kind of internet connection, and you need a kind of a connection at least once every 30 days, but for highly secure networks, they never connect to the internet.
So we should talk about kind of why that is and how that works on the activation side. So we, with Office 365 Pro Plus, actually roam links to your files, roam your personalization settings, roam your themes, all that stuff, regardless of what computer you're logged in with. At the same time, we're looking to see whether or not your IT department has deprovisioned you as a user. So let's say I log into a computer and I've been fired from my company. I could then be deprovisioned, and then it will basically detect that. And I have the rights to basically yank off those, because we've got 5 installs per user, yank off the activation state of, say, the user's home computer, personally owned devices, which is a feature in terms of if you've got a lot of fluctuation of users, and once we've got all the Active Directory sync and all that stuff set up in the background, as I'm managing normal directory services and add or remove users, they will have the ability to either install Office, or when I remove them from my AD, they will basically go into a deactivated state if they're on their home machine, one of those 5 installs that I gave them as part of their employment package, essentially. That is something I have the power to basically remove from personally owned devices.
So you're probably wondering, okay, well, what about these other scenarios? Well, in these scenarios, you would need to get kind of the volume license So think of it, the MSI version. Now, the equivalent to Office 365 Pro Plus is the Office Professional Plus 2013 edition. And they contain the exact same set of applications. So
and I need to also inject one more point
Yes.
that was related to what I just said before. You can be offline as many as 30 days. So I get this question a lot where, hey, I've got a guy who goes on vacation, he's on a cruise, whatever. He's not going to connect, for 30 days. Can he still use Office? Yes, you're going to be able to use it offline without any internet connection as an Office 365 Pro Plus user. After day 31, let's say he's deactivated but gets the internet back. Or the more common scenario, I've got a laptop that I haven't used in 6 months that's sitting under my desk.
Yep.
I pull that back, I get an internet connection. We'll actually find that that user's still active and just re-up or rearm the activation in the background, probably before he even knows it, or while the app's launching. So all of this stuff is designed so that you can be offline, or put the user's computer under his desk or something, not use it for a period of several months, and when he comes back online, it will just reactivate.
So we have all these different possible deployment methods. What we're going to focus kind of the rest of the talk on is talking a little bit about how to use the Office deployment tool and kind of click to run in this new world with these kind of deployment methods in kind of circled there. So let's start with application virtualization. I think a couple people mentioned they're using AppV. In this case, has anybody of those people who were using AppV, how many of you had tried to sequence like a previous version of Office, like Office 2010? Anybody tried doing that?
Nobody.
Nobody. Maybe they tried and gave up.
Maybe. Or maybe they're just not here today.
Or they're not here. But it was kind of a cumbersome process, and there was a lot of documentation. There were a lot of steps you had to follow, and specific sequencing steps you had to do, and kind of a deployment kit that you had to do. So one of the things that the Office product team and the AppV product team did for this release was kind of got their heads together and said, there's got to be a better way for our customers and a better experience. And so what they did is they've added a packager mode to the Office deployment tool to automatically generate an AppV package that then can be used in your AppV infrastructure or Configuration Manager 2012 SP1. Also supports using AppV packages. So,
right.
And in this case, what we've done is we've done all the work for you. So you just do another kind of command line. It creates the package, and then you go ahead and put that package into your AppV environment. Now, one of the kind of benefits that you can get from doing that is when we kind of looked at that first slide, when we looked at all the applications that came with ProPlus, by default, when you install with the Office deployment tool, it installs all those applications. And in some companies, maybe they don't want people to have access for whatever reason, or the message...
Access is in Microsoft Access,
yeah, sorry.
The Office app.
Yep, that's correct, Microsoft Access. In some cases, the team that runs messaging and Exchange, they might not be ready to roll out Outlook and support Outlook 2013. So for the time being, they might say, we don't want to deploy that. So one of the things that you can do with AppV and this package is once the package is built, you can actually kind of control, hey, I want Word and PowerPoint and Excel given to my users, but I'm not going to deploy Outlook 2013. I'm not going to deploy Access 2013.
Right, so if I use that, it's kind of an all or nothing approach, as you mentioned,
Yep.
in terms of click to run a native install with the entire suite of apps. Basically, if I'm using a normal click to run package, I might want to use something like either first removing the shortcuts to those files. If I say don't want infopath.exe exposed to that end user, or if I want to be hardcore about it, I can block that with something like AppLocker through policy, so they can't fire up Microsoft Access or InfoPath, or maybe Link if I've got another unified communication service in place. Those are pretty common asks and questions that we get in terms of how we block various components.
Yeah. Now, to show you how easy it is, Jeremy, can you hit the button to go to my screen
Yes.
here?
Oh, sorry.
I think I'm number 2.
That was the one that I want. Okay.
And there we go. And so, in this case, setup, once again, we're using Office deployment tool. We're using packager mode, so /packager. I created an XML file that basically specified the location of where my source files were. And in this case, the syntax, you also have to place say, okay, where do I want to create the package and store the package. Now, nothing actually happens here in my demo for about 4 minutes and 25 seconds. So to spare you that, if I can actually get the mouse to click in the right spot. At about 4:25, all of a sudden another window spawns, and all sorts of things happen in this case for about another 5.5 minutes.
And a nice piece of trivia, the exe is called flattener.exe because what we're really doing is flattening the package, removing the native application virtualization client-like bits, and just basically flattening that to just the core package of Office, because in the case where we have an AppV client in place, we don't need something that will establish the virtual file system and do all the stuff that an AppV client would do. So we can strip all of those things out of a click-to-run package and basically output the .appv files and the manifest and everything we need for that.
And so that you don't have to sit there and watch the screen go by and trying to see, was there an error anywhere? It actually outputs all this information into a text file. And so you can kind of go back and troubleshoot and see what actually happened. It's called, it gets put, what happens is after the package is created, it creates two folders in this working directory. Here's this flattener file. And it creates an AppV package. And I'll just do a quick demo here just to show you how easy this is, hopefully. We're actually not going to do a deployment. What I would do is I would recommend there was a session on Monday called AppV 5.0 and Office Better Together. If you're interested in knowing more of kind of the gory details, what are all the cool things about AppV and how to do, we did a lot of PowerShell, but kind of showing all the ins and outs and how you can put add-ins together with your packages in AppV 5.0. That's all covered in that.
So the cool things you get with AppV, ability to turn off apps, also add-ins, collections that we can have in terms of how we apply various add-in components. And when I load an add-in in Office, then if I'm using AppV to deploy all that customization, it will look up to the AppV server if I've customized those, grab that as the kind of source of truth, load those dynamically in as I launch the app. So it's a bit more elegant way in terms of managing add-ins, plus you get some more configuration if you use application virtualization. So if you have it, definitely use it in the case of Office 365 ProPlus.
Oops. It helps if I read the UI.
Yes, it definitely does.
Somebody actually took the effort to write that. So, and at this point, the package is added, and I can actually edit the default configuration. And down here, just a series of checkboxes, and I can turn off access, I can turn off Outlook. And actually, you'll see the same thing in Configuration Manager. When you add the AppV package, there's part of the user interface and the properties where there's kind of a similar UI where it lists all the applications that are part of the package, and you can kind of pick and choose which ones you want to deploy to your users. And obviously with Configuration Manager, you can target different groups and give them different sets of applications, so the finance department might get access for some reason. So the other thing, kind of touching on kind of the upgrade experience, to kind of do an upgrade of your Office as we have like new builds come out. This is, let's say this is the May build, and eventually I'm going to want to deploy the July build. What I'll do is I'll use the Office deployment tool to bring those files down to my on-premise location. I'll do the same thing that I just did. I'll use the Office deployment tool with the packager mode. I'll create a new AppV package. I'll come back into this console. I'll add it, and automatically it knows it's of the same lineage as previous packages. So it knows that, okay, this is an upgraded version of Office that needs to go out to the clients. So it's pretty straightforward and simple now to kind of push out Office with AppV.
Right, and like the updates, all of the stuff that constitute the end-to-end Office experience.
Yep. So let's talk about more deployment methods.
There is, of course, more than you can do than AppV. And I think there's an AppV session going on right now. That's probably why we don't have a lot of AppV guys in there.
That could be it.
So in terms of configuration managers, that's something else that we can do. We've got kind of two different modes. The application model versus package mode. So package mode is kind of the traditional way to deploy applications where things can either run from, download and execute style or right from the distribution point. Anybody using the app model right now as a deployment? Not a lot of people. Everybody using package mode right now in terms of config manager? Quite a few people. Nice thing with package mode that you get in terms of the Office installation is if I want to, I've got the flexibility of actually having it install from the DP, distribution point, of System Center Config Manager, whereas in application model, in every instance, it's going to download that entire package to CCM cache, which is around a gigabyte payload like we saw earlier. If we want to avoid that and kind of minimize network bandwidth and consumption, if I leave it up on the distribution point, as long as both the system account, which by definition has access to the DP, can get to those files, then it will download and install just the 700 megs or so instead of a gigabyte to get Office installed with that language. So if you're using that model, though, it's going to push down all of the stuff, and you might have multiple languages. It might be bigger than a gig, and it will install straight from CCM cache. So that's one of the trade-offs you get. Whereas, because this is a bigger application, not really a normal application in terms of some of the smaller, maybe 10 meg MSIs that you're pushing around. This one's something that you might want to use package mode instead of application model in certain cases. But application model does have a lot of richness in terms of maybe matching languages based on the Windows shell language, so I can do that type of thing with the app model. But I can do a lot of that in the package mode as well. I can use app v version 5 as long as I've got SCCM 2012 SP1. We do need click-to-run packages, which means in our case, Office 365 ProPlus, to convert to the app v packages that we saw earlier. But from a System Center standpoint, you don't want to use the app v integration in older versions of System Center than System Center 2012 SP1 because we need that app v 5.0 foundation that build of System Center and newer support. So we also, in terms of System Center, we've always got this question, do we want to use download and execute, or do we want to use local file source? And what we can do now, and we'll talk about that in a bit, is do we want to stream things from our Office CDN? There are abilities now that we can basically, instead of use our own infrastructure to point System Center to or Windows Intune to, we can point and specify the version number and everything to the Office CDN if we want to, assuming that computer's got internet connectivity, and stream it directly from our robust services that we manage millions of installs from. But we still have all the controls in terms of determining which version number we want to give them, where we want it to look for updates, what the update behavior is, all that stuff. Because really, when you download and import a click-to-run package, you can't modify the base image of Office anyway. So the source of truth is identical, whether it's on your premises, in your distribution point, or it's in the cloud. So now I've got the flexibility. Let's say I don't want people sucking the entire 1 gigabyte payload through a VPN connection if they're on the road. I want to be able to punt them off to a public internet connection to get that build down. You can do that as well. So I basically kick down the setup.exe with a config file. That will say use as the source path just the default Office 365 CDN, which is basically if I eliminate that source path string altogether, it will do that. It will download from the internet the version number I want, the update behavior, the bitness, all of that stuff, and then it will communicate success back to System Center. So it looks like System Center did all the deployment, whereas actually it only needed to kick down about 250 kilobyte or so payload to get all of that to work and basically point to the CDN for the rest of the stream. So with that, I want to show kind of what the experience looks like on 8. On a System Center Config Manager deployment. Am I over? There we go. So inside of System Center Configuration Manager, as I would normally do, I specify the package name. I can, if I want to, specify a description, all that stuff. Here I'm going to point to the source folder. I've got a fairly easy one to navigate to, CM1 source. And I can basically do what I would normally do in terms of determining all the different package attributes. So in this case, we're just giving it a name. We're calling the command line that we have here, which is running that setup.exe bootstrapper with the configure switch, as we saw earlier, and pointing to a configuration XML file, which we've named install.xml. That's going to run from that UNC path, and then we can basically import our package into System Center and create a deployment from that if we want to. So now we've got the package in, and now if we want to deploy that, we click on Deploy as you would do for normal apps. Target the collection that we want to deploy to, and then after that, we can add which distribution points we want to replicate all of that at, and whether or not we want users to self-install or make it a mandatory package, all of that still applies. So if I'm using Software Center and System Center Config Manager, I can do that, or the application portal, all of that stuff still applies. In terms of all the stuff that we have there from a software available perspective, we can look at and see the packages in place. When I move over to the user machine, we basically see that in the Software Center, we have the ability to install. When I click on that as a user, Config Manager is basically pushing that package down on behalf of the user. The user is not actually an admin in this case. He's just saying he wants the file and he wants to install Office. And in short order, because we're using streaming here, it's going to install, it's going to copy everything, in this case, into CCM cache, install from CCM cache, and about, typically in a decent network throughput, it'll take maybe 2 to 3 minutes if you've got a good file copy, and then another 2 minutes or so to get all of that to propagate. So in 5 minutes or less, typically, I'll be able to both cache it and install from local cache and have all my apps available to me as the user. So basically similar to what we had in any other installation of Office, where you're basically running a bootstrap or setup.exe, importing the package as you normally would. It's running from CCM cache, available to the user, or you can do it as a mandatory package, and it's up and running, using all the streaming in terms of getting that speed benefit there as well. So beyond that, we can also do, as I mentioned earlier, leverage the cloud as a distribution point, which is pretty cool stuff, because now, again, if I'm in an environment where I don't want to have everybody downloading that 1 gigabyte payload over my VPN, I can have I can use Configuration Manager against Azure DPs, which it works in Config Manager now, or I can use Office 365. So the bottom section, the plus signs can be one way or the other, essentially. Wherever I want to point it to, it can look for those builds. So literally, if I basically take the config file that Dan showed earlier, point that in source path to either nothing or the Office 365 CDN, nothing is probably the easier one to do of the two, then it will look for local source. By default, it says, okay, there's no source path. I'm going to look first where setup.exe is located. If I don't find a folder with a build number in it, I'm going to go directly to the internet and look from the Office CDN. At that point, we can still parse in the version numbers we want, everything else that we want, to have complete control over what gets installed. And it is verbatim identical to what you'd be able to do on premises if you downloaded the package and pushed it out over your own network. This way, you have the flexibility, though, of using a public internet connection to do all of that work. So the process kind of looks like this. If you think about the old days where you might have taken, say, a build from the Volume License Service Center, you would download that into a file share, probably upload that into Windows Intune if you're using Intune. You might have a couple of gigabytes of storage up there, and in the trial account phases back in earlier Intune, it would be 2 gigabytes of application storage. I think there's 20 gigabytes now. But you're using a substantial chunk of that application storage once you upload a few versions of Office to that. So to circumvent all of these things of downloading, re-uploading, and then reinstalling, we can cut a lot of those processes out and basically say, let's point Intune at the Office 365 CDN, and that will actually install directly from there. So we basically send down a tiny package, anywhere from the 200 to 400 kilobyte range, so less than a megabyte, that goes down to the client. It will then look up and install what I tell it to from the Office CDN, then report success back up to Windows Intune. So what that looks like when running is roughly, let's see, here, hold on. There we go. So what this will look like is I'm logged into Windows Intune, and I've got, I want to look at my software. I can add software like I did in System Center Config Manager. It's the same process, whether I'm using Config Manager in this case, or Windows Intune, because I'm basically telling it where to point for our installation source. So once I load the software into Windows Intune, what I can do if I want to is just upload that tiny setup.exe that Dan showed earlier from the Office deployment tool and a configuration file. We're going to look at, we basically added a software description to that. We can have rules there, so we can look for whether or not a file exists, so we can look at the installation route as to whether or not winward.exe is there, for example. And then I can point it to, from a command line perspective, to a configuration.xml file and specify, as I normally would, a return code for success or failure. And just like any other package, I'm ready to go, basically. At that point, I can decide what I want to do with that. So in our case, we've got a few apps in there. Now I can manage the deployment and determine which groups have the availability of that package. So I'll go ahead, in our case, apply to all users, make it an available install so they can be it can be a self-install if they want to do that. And at that point, I've only uploaded that tiny, in this case 461 kilobyte package, less than a meg package for to be passed around from Intune directly to the endpoint. When I go into the endpoint itself, I will be able to see right from the Internet portal what apps are available for me as a user. I can go ahead and click on any one of these apps as I normally would with Intune, but here I'll click on Office 365 ProPlus, and I will see which machines I can install to. In my case, I will install to the Jeremy Intune machine that I'm using now. And the nice thing is that I'm only passing down half a megabyte of that setup and that configuration XML. So it's going to look like Windows Intune is downloading the software super duper fast. I didn't have to speed this up at all. And literally then it will start the stream directly from the Office 365 CDN, and I'll be able to get those apps up and running using Intune in about the speed of a normal, like a user self-install from the Office 365 portal. I actually did a stunt on the Office Garage series where I installed Office from my car, tethered to my T-Mobile 4G phone connection in the span of the 520 bridge in Seattle.
During rush hour?
Not during rush hour. With closed circuits. No animals were harmed in the filming of that, in that stunt. But basically, in the span of that bridge, in about 3 minutes, I was able to get Intune to kick off the install, stream it from the Office 365 CDN, and I was up and running very, very quickly in that case. So this is a brand new deployment option where basically instead of using my local distribution points or maybe my Azure DP, I can use Office 365 as the deployment point in that case.
And you don't even need to have Intune or Configuration Manager, whatever your tool is. You're just using the Office deployment tool, your customized configuration XML,
right,
and just pointing your people. It could be the salesperson who's on the road a lot, doesn't come into the office that much, and say, hey, give them the little package that scripts that and have them hit the Office 365 site to get the software and get it installed.
Right. Now, before we get to the more information slides and the wrap-ups, what I wanted to ask, and this is part of the things we do in the Garage series on Microsoft.com/garage, we do stunts. So anybody think that Office can install during 90 seconds of free fall of a skydiver when we push them out of an airplane? And we're going to test that. And we did test that here in Sydney, Australia, with my co-host Yoni on the show. So we've got our stuntman here. His legal name is actually Fully Sick, spelled literally. This is his real name. He's had it legally changed to Fully because he's of Polish descent, I believe, and it's Sick as a surname. So they're up in the airplane, and basically, Yoni didn't want to do this himself because he would have to do the tandem skydive thing, which isn't as appealing, I guess, from a footage standpoint. But we actually we kicked off the install from the airplane, and we actually have a chase skydiver, the guy that's got the two cameras on his helmet. We're using GoPros here to film all this stuff. But basically, the other guy's kind of in a winged bat suit to film all the installation that Fully Sick is doing while in the air. And we told him he couldn't open his parachute until Office was up and running.
So we might have to cut at some point.
And no Fully Sicks were harmed in the filming of this stunt. So basically, just to prove kind of in terms of, and if you're a skydiver, and I'm not, if you're a skydiver, there is roughly about 90 seconds of free fall, so it was a good race, a good test. But in this case, our stuntman, Fully Sick, was able to get Office installed prior to pulling his chute, as we'll see in a second. Now, some other things I've done this last week, so we're doing more stunts. We had productivity stunts out in the bayou, where we actually had alligators that were wrestling as part of staying productive and, Office versus the Wild kind of thematic. And we also did co-authoring with a blues band in Carrollton Station. So that's something else that we'll be bringing out to the show in the next couple of weeks. Right, so more information, though. You can get the Office Deployment Tool. This deck is available for everybody. You can download that from the Download Center. The Content Roadmap, excellent resource on TechNet that really lays out all the different TechNet articles. The Office IT Pro blog, where you'll find the Garage series as well, and all the click-to-run content we did there, all the crazy stunts that we do. That's actually the current blog post. And Office for IT Pros Tech Center as well. Some related content that we have this week. There are some breakout sessions around deploying Office. We're out of time, and a hands-on lab around deploying Office as a service. So you can find me later in the garage. We'll have 5 more sessions today in the Office booth, and that's all we have time for. Dan,
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for
And
coming
hopefully
this morning.
you've had a great event, and we'll see you maybe downstairs in the Office Garage booth. Thank you very much.
Might take us half an hour to walk down there, but
Exactly. And please fill out your evals. Tell us what you think.
yes, please.